In the heart of the African savanna, where life and death balance on a razor's edge, a tiny hyena pup struggled to survive after losing one of its paws. Alone, fragile, and forced to face predators and hunger, no one believed it could make it with only 3 legs. But when the impossible seemed within reach, something even darker emerged from the shadows. A turn of fate that no one expected. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring and emotional stories like this to you. Get ready, because this story will challenge everything you thought you knew about survival, courage, and the unexpected bonds that shape the wild. The first cries of the savannah in the morning belonged not to lions or elephants, but to a tiny, broken voice. In a patch of dry grass near a shallow stream, a baby hyena lay trembling. His small body shivered despite the sun rising over the horizon. One of his back legs ended not in a paw, but in raw flesh that had healed unevenly after an accident no one had seen. Whether it was a trap left by poachers, a predator's brutal attack, or a cruel twist of fate, the result was the same: a hyena pup left with only 3 working legs. His clan had abandoned him days earlier. In the wild, survival depends on strength, and weakness is a danger to the group. The mother had lingered longer than the rest, torn between instinct and maternal love, but eventually even she walked away. The pup, barely able to hobble after her, had collapsed into the grass, watching her spotted coat vanish into the distance. From that moment on, every sound in the savannah was a threat, and every shadow could mean the end. But the pup, later named Keto by those who would cross his path, did not give up. He dragged himself to the edge of the stream, lowering his muzzle into the cool water. Each lap burned his throat, but it was life. Around him, the world was alive. Zebras moved in the distance, vultures circled lazily above, and the wind carried the smell of dust and fear. Keto had only 3 legs, but he had something no predator could steal: the will to keep breathing. That same morning, on the other side of the reserve, Daniel Harris, a 37-year-old wildlife caretaker from Colorado, tightened the straps of his worn leather boots. Daniel had come to Africa 5 years earlier, leaving behind a quiet suburban life and a marriage that had collapsed under the weight of unspoken dreams. The savannah, with its endless skies and relentless struggles, had given him purpose. He worked at a rescue center for injured animals, a place where broken creatures were given one last chance. Daniel's colleagues often reminded him that hyenas were not creatures of sympathy. "They're scavengers, Daniel," one ranger had said, shrugging. "They don't need saving. They'll never love you back." But Daniel disagreed. He had seen the look in a hyena's eyes when it fought for food, when it protected its young, when it faced the loneliness of exile. To him, there was no animal unworthy of compassion. And fate was about to test that belief. As Daniel drove his dusty Jeep across the reserve that afternoon, binoculars resting on the dashboard, he noticed movement near the stream. At first, he thought it was a jackal limping through the tall grass. But when he slowed down and stepped out, the truth cut into him. It was a hyena pup, frail, trembling, with patches of fur missing. Daniel's heart clenched as he saw the wound where the 4th leg should have been. The pup bared his tiny teeth, growling weakly, his voice cracked with hunger and pain. He tried to hop away, dragging his injured body with desperate strength. But the effort was too much. He collapsed into the dust, panting. Daniel crouched a few feet away, lowering his hands to show he carried no threat. His voice was calm, almost like he was speaking to a frightened child. "It's okay, little one," he murmured. "I'm not here to hurt you." Keto's amber eyes burned with fear and defiance. For him, every creature was a predator now, even this strange man with gentle words. Daniel slowly unwrapped a piece of dried meat from his pocket, the same he used to feed orphan jackals. He laid it on the ground and backed away. The pup sniffed the air, hesitation written in every movement, then dragged himself forward. Hunger was stronger than suspicion. He tore into the meat, his small jaws shaking with effort. Daniel exhaled in relief. A connection had been made, not trust, not yet, but survival had created a fragile thread between man and hyena. That night, Daniel returned to the rescue center with Keto wrapped in a canvas blanket on the passenger seat. The pup had resisted fiercely, snapping at his hands, but exhaustion finally subdued him. The other caretakers shook their heads when Daniel carried the hyena inside. A hyena? One of them scoffed. And a crippled one at that? He won't last a week. Daniel ignored the voices. He focused only on the fragile heartbeat he could feel against his chest. He laid Quito in a small enclosure, gave him water and whispered, "You've made it this far. You're not dying on my watch." For days, Daniel tended to the pup. He cleaned the wound, changed the wrappings, and tried to build strength in the 3 remaining legs. Quito, however, met every act of kindness with suspicion. He growled when Daniel entered, snapped when food was offered, and pressed himself into the farthest corner whenever hands reached for him. But Daniel never raised his voice, never forced affection. He simply stayed close, patient as the desert itself. One evening, after a week of silence between them, Daniel sat outside the enclosure, writing in his journal by lantern light. He didn't notice at first that Quito had crept closer, his nose pressed against the bars. The pup stared at him, not with aggression, but with curiosity. For the first time, Daniel allowed himself to smile. "That's it, little one. We're in this together." Yet survival in the savannah is never a straight path. One night, as Daniel checked on the animals before dawn, he found Quito's enclosure empty. The gate had been left unlatched, and the pup had limped into the darkness. Panic surged through Daniel. A 3-legged hyena alone in the wilderness was nothing more than prey. He grabbed a flashlight and sprinted into the tall grass, his heart pounding. "Quito," he shouted into the night, his voice breaking the silence of the reserve. "Don't do this, you won't survive out there." The wind swallowed his words. Somewhere in the distance, a hyena's faint call echoed back, but Daniel couldn't tell if it belonged to Quito or to something waiting to devour him. And in that terrifying moment, Daniel realized, saving Quito wasn't just about rescuing an animal. It was about facing the wild's cruelest truth. Sometimes the ones you fight hardest to protect are the ones who slip away. The beam of Daniel's flashlight cut through the tall grass like a blade, but the darkness swallowed almost everything beyond a few feet. The night in the savannah was a living thing, alive with sounds that made the skin prickle, low growls in the distance, the flap of unseen wings, the unsettling laughter of hyenas echoing across the plains. Daniel's boots sank into the dry earth as he pushed forward, calling out, "Quito!" His voice broke with urgency. Each time he shouted, silence answered, followed by a rustle that could have been the pup or could have been something far more dangerous. Quito, dragging his 3 legs through the wilderness, was somewhere out there, frightened and vulnerable. Daniel's chest tightened with guilt. He should never have trusted that the latch was secure. One mistake, and the fragile bond he had fought to build could vanish forever. Hours passed. The moon rode high, casting silver shadows across the savannah. Daniel's flashlight began to dim, its weak light bouncing across termite mounds and thorn bushes. Sweat dripped from his forehead, mixing with dust. Every few minutes he stopped, listening for the faintest sound of Quito's uneven steps. Then, faintly he heard it, a whimper. Daniel froze, holding his breath. It was soft, almost lost in the wind, but unmistakable. He followed the sound, moving carefully through the brush until his light fell on a small, trembling shape curled against a rock. Relief surged through Daniel, but it was short-lived. The pup was not alone. A pair of glowing eyes hovered in the darkness, low to the ground, accompanied by the soft growl of a predator circling its prey. Daniel knew that sound. A jackal. The animal snapped its teeth, approaching the injured hyena pup. Quito tried to snarl, but his growl was weak, almost pitiful. The jackal moved closer, sensing the easy kill. Daniel didn't think, he acted. He grabbed a stone from the ground and hurled it toward the jackal with all his strength. The rock landed with a thud, startling the predator. "Get out of here!" Daniel roared, his voice deeper and louder than he knew he was capable of. The jackal hesitated, then slunk back into the shadows, its glowing eyes disappearing into the night. Daniel rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside Quito. The pup whimpered again, too exhausted to resist. His small body was trembling violently, his fur matted with dirt. "You stubborn little fighter," Daniel whispered, scooping him into his arms. "You're not dying out here." By the time Daniel returned to the rescue center, the sun was rising. His colleagues were waiting at the gate, arms crossed, expressions ranging from concern to disapproval. "You went into the savannah at night? Alone?" one of them demanded. "You could have been killed, Daniel." Daniel ignored the scolding. He carried Quito inside, laying him gently on a blanket. The pup's eyes fluttered open, and for the first time, instead of baring his teeth, he rested his head against Daniel's arm. It was a gesture so small, yet it struck Daniel like lightning. Trust, fragile and trembling, had finally taken root. Over the next few days, Daniel refused to leave Quito's side. He fed him small portions of meat, cleaned his fur, and spoke to him in the calm, steady tone he used with all frightened animals. Quito's eyes followed him constantly now, no longer filled with defiance, but with something softer, curiosity, maybe even dependence. But the others at the center weren't convinced. "You can't keep him," said Grace, the head caretaker, as she stood at the doorway of Quito's enclosure. "Hyenas aren't like dogs. They don't bond the way you think they do. He'll grow, and he'll turn dangerous. It's only a matter of time." Daniel leaned against the bars, his voice steady but firm. "Every creature deserves a chance. You think because he's a hyena, he can't be loyal? You're wrong. He's already proven he wants to live." Grace shook her head, unconvinced. "Don't let compassion blind you, Daniel. Nature is cruel. You'll only end up hurt." But Daniel refused to listen. He had seen the spark in Quito's eyes. It wasn't just survival, it was something deeper, something that connected them both. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel decided to take Quito outside the enclosure for the first time. The pup limped cautiously at his side, every movement awkward but determined. They walked to a small clearing near the rescue center, the sky painted in fiery orange and purple. Quito sniffed the ground, his ears twitching at every sound. For the first time since Daniel had found him, the pup seemed almost free. Daniel crouched beside him. "See that, little one? The world isn't all pain. There's beauty too. You just have to keep fighting to see it." Quito lifted his head, his golden eyes locking onto Daniel's. For a moment, man and hyena stared at each other, an unspoken promise forming between them. But peace is fragile in the wild. Later that night, the rescue center was shaken by an unexpected visitor, a group of local herders, angry and shouting. They stormed through the gates, demanding to see the caretakers. One of them, an older man with deep lines etched across his face, pointed at Quito's enclosure. "That animal has no place here. Hyenas steal our goats, they kill our livestock. Why waste food and medicine on a creature that only brings destruction?" The others nodded, voices rising in agreement. "Release it, or we'll do it ourselves." Daniel stepped forward, placing himself between the men and Quito. His voice was calm, but his body was rigid with tension. "This pup is not your enemy. He's injured, helpless. If we abandon him now, what does that say about us? That compassion only belongs to animals we approve of." The herders weren't convinced. One of them spat on the ground. "You'll regret this. That hyena will turn on you. It's in his nature." The crowd eventually dispersed, muttering threats as they left. But the damage had been done. The rescue center staff grew uneasy, whispers spreading that keeping Quito would only invite more conflict. Daniel sat by the pup's side that night, running a hand gently across his spotted fur. "Looks like it's you and me against the world, little one," he said softly. Quito responded with a quiet whimper, pressing closer. For the first time, Daniel understood the true weight of his decision. Saving Quito wasn't just about healing wounds or earning trust. It meant defying prejudice, standing against fear, and proving that even a three-legged hyena had value in a world that had already sentenced him to die. But deep inside, Daniel couldn't shake one terrifying question. Would Quito prove them wrong, or would nature prove them right? The following week brought restless nights and cautious days. The tension from the herders' visits still hung over the rescue center like a storm cloud. Conversations stopped when Daniel entered a room. Colleagues who once admired his patience now avoided eye contact. Everyone seemed to agree, the pup didn't belong. Everyone except Daniel. Keto's recovery was slow, but progress came in small, stubborn steps. His 3 legs grew stronger, his gait steadier. When Daniel entered the enclosure, the pup no longer shrank into the corner. Instead, he lifted his head, ears twitching, eyes searching. One afternoon, Daniel brought a piece of meat, crouched low, and held it out in his palm instead of tossing it on the ground. Keto hesitated, his gaze flicking from Daniel's face to the offering. His body trembled with conflict. Instinct told him to fear, but hunger told him to trust. At last, he stepped forward, dragging his weaker hind leg behind him. With a sharp nip, he snatched the meat from Daniel's hand. For a heartbeat, Daniel felt the graze of tiny teeth against his skin. He didn't flinch. He let the pup eat, his chest swelling with quiet triumph. "Good boy," Daniel whispered. "You're stronger than they'll ever know." It was the first true bridge of trust between them. By evening, Daniel decided to push their progress further. He slipped a small harness gently over Keto's shoulders. The pup squirmed, growling softly, but Daniel murmured calming words until he stilled. Then, together, they stepped outside. The savannah stretched endlessly in golden light. Birds wheeled overhead, and the smell of dry earth filled the air. Daniel walked slowly, Keto limping alongside. At first, the pup lagged behind, unsure of this strange freedom. But when a butterfly fluttered past his nose, something changed. Keto lunged playfully, snapping at the air, his uneven body wobbling but determined. Daniel laughed out loud, the sound carrying across the plains. For the first time since finding him, Keto wasn't just surviving, he was living. Daniel knelt in the grass, scratching lightly behind Keto's ears. "See? The world is still yours, little one. 3 legs or not, you belong here." The hyena pup pressed against him, his body warm and alive. The moment was fragile, yet powerful, like a seed finally breaking through the soil. But in the savannah, peace is always temporary. A week later, a storm swept across the reserve. Thunder cracked overhead, and the wind roared like an angry beast. Sheets of rain hammered the rescue center, flooding the dirt paths and shaking the enclosures. Daniel rushed through the storm to check on Keto, but when he reached the enclosure, his heart stopped. The gate had come loose again, blown open by the wind. The pup was gone. Panic surged through him. "Not again," he muttered, grabbing a lantern and sprinting into the rain. The downpour turned the ground to mud, every footprint washing away in seconds. Lightning split the sky, illuminating flashes of the wilderness. Daniel's chest heaved as he ran, calling Keto's name over and over, the storm drowning his voice. Finally, through the rain, he heard it, the desperate yelp of a hyena pup. Daniel followed the sound, slipping in the mud until he came to a ravine where water rushed dangerously. Keto was there, clinging to a small rock with his 3 legs, the current threatening to pull him under. His eyes were wide with terror, his body slick with rain. Daniel didn't hesitate. He leapt into the torrent, the cold water slamming into his chest. He fought against the current, reaching for the pup. Keto snapped in fear, his tiny jaws clamping onto Daniel's sleeve. "Hold on!" Daniel shouted, tightening his grip around the struggling body. He dragged himself back to solid ground, his muscles screaming, and collapsed onto the mud with Keto pressed against his chest. The pup shook violently, but this time he didn't try to pull away. He buried his head against Daniel's soaked shirt, clinging to him as though instinct had shifted from fear to trust. Daniel wrapped his arms around him, whispering through the storm, "I've got you. I'll always have you." When they returned to the center, both soaked and trembling, Daniel expected more disapproval from his colleagues. Instead, there was silence, deep, uneasy silence. Grace approached, her expression softer than before. "You risked your life for him," she said quietly. Daniel met her eyes, his voice firm. "And I'd do it again." She nodded slowly, as though something inside her had shifted. Not full acceptance, but recognition. Perhaps Keto wasn't just another scavenger after all. Days passed, and Keto's bond with Daniel grew unbreakable. The pup began following him everywhere, limping across the yard when Daniel carried supplies, resting his head on Daniel's boots when he paused to write in his journal. Each night, Daniel found comfort in the soft breathing beside him, a reminder that life could endure even after being broken. But then came the setback that tested everything. During a routine check in the enclosure yard, Daniel left Keto under the supervision of a colleague while he fixed a broken lash. Suddenly, a sharp cry split the air. Daniel spun around and saw Keto cornered by two other rescue animals, a pair of jackals brought in days earlier. They had slipped into his space, circling with predatory intent. Keto, weaker and slower, stood his ground, growling as fiercely as his small lungs allowed. Daniel shouted and rushed forward, but not before one jackal lunged, teeth sinking into Keto's shoulder. The pup cried out, collapsing to the ground. Daniel tore the jackal away, his heart pounding with rage. He scooped Keto into his arms, blood seeping through his shirt. The pup whimpered, his body limp, his eyes dull with pain. "Stay with me," Daniel pleaded, running toward the medical tent. "Please, don't give up now." The staff worked quickly, cleaning and stitching the wound. Daniel refused to leave Keto's side, holding his paw as though his presence alone could anchor the pup to life. Hours passed before the bleeding stopped and Keto's breathing steadied. Finally, the pup stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He looked up at Daniel, weak but alive. Relief flooded through him, tears mixing with exhaustion. "You're a fighter," Daniel whispered. "But how much more can you endure?" That night, as Daniel watched Keto sleep, the weight of doubt pressed on him. Every step forward seemed followed by disaster. Each moment of progress balanced on the edge of tragedy. He wondered if he was asking too much of the fragile creature, if saving him was an act of compassion or of selfishness. Outside, the savannah roared with distant thunder, a reminder that storms would always return. And Daniel asked himself the question that would haunt him for nights to come. How long could even the strongest will survive when the world itself seemed determined to break it? The morning sun broke over the savannah with a brilliance that felt almost cruel. For Daniel, every ray of light seemed to carry the weight of yesterday's battle. The stitches in Keto's shoulder, the faint tremor in his breathing, the fragile line between survival and surrender. He hadn't slept, and his eyes were rimmed red from holding back tears, but he refused to let fatigue win. Not now, not when Keto still needed him. Keto stirred weakly in the corner of the tent, the scar on his shoulder stark against his spotted coat. He struggled to rise, his 3 legs trembling under his weight, but somehow he managed to stand. Daniel leaned forward, holding his breath as the pup limped toward him, every step a statement. "I'm not finished yet." The rescue staff gathered, silent witnesses to the moment. For weeks, they had doubted, questioned, even mocked the idea that a 3-legged hyena could survive. But here he was, proving them wrong one shaky step at a time. Grace, her voice unsteady, whispered, "He's still fighting." Daniel nodded, unable to speak. His throat was too tight, his chest too heavy with pride and fear. That afternoon, Daniel carried Keto outside for the first time since the attack. The savannah stretched endlessly around them, alive with whispers of wind and the distant calls of wild animals. Daniel set Keto down gently on the grass. For a moment, the pup wobbled, uncertain. Then, as though sensing the importance of this moment, he limped forward. One step, another. His gait was uneven, clumsy, but determined. The staff held their breath, watching him move across the open land. Daniel crouched low, his arms open, calling softly. "Come on, boy. You can do this. Just a little more." And Keto came. He stumbled, fell, then dragged himself up again, his ears twitching, his eyes locked on Daniel's face. Finally, he reached him and collapsed into Daniel's arms, panting but triumphant. The staff erupted into applause. Even those who had been cold or dismissive couldn't deny what they had witnessed. Resilience in its purest form. News of Keto's survival began to spread. A visiting journalist wrote an article titled, "The Hyena That Refused to Die." Photos of Daniel holding the scarred, 3-legged pup circulated online. For the first time, the world wasn't laughing at a scavenger. They were admiring a survivor. Donations poured in for the center, along with letters from people who saw themselves in Keto's struggle. Amputees who had learned to walk again, cancer survivors who had fought the odds, single parents who carried the weight of impossible burdens. They wrote, "If a hyena can survive on 3 legs, maybe I can too." Daniel read each message aloud in the evenings, his voice soft as Quito rested his head on his lap. The pup didn't understand the words, but Daniel swore he felt the weight of them, the way his ears flicked, the way his body pressed closer as though sensing he had become something larger than himself, a symbol of perseverance. Months passed, and Quito grew stronger. His limp remained, but his spirit only burned brighter. He learned to run short distances, awkward but swift. He learned to wrestle playfully with other rescued animals, never backing down despite his disadvantage. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, Daniel sat with Grace on the porch of the center. Quito lay at their feet, gnawing happily on a bone. "You were right to fight for him," Grace said quietly. "I didn't believe it at first, but he's special." Daniel looked down at the pup, his eyes glistening. "He's more than special. He's proof that being broken doesn't mean being finished." Grace smiled faintly. "And you? What has he taught you?" Daniel leaned back, gazing at the horizon. "That sometimes the smallest life can carry the heaviest lessons. And that when the world tells you to give up, that's when you fight harder." The day finally came when Daniel had to make the hardest choice of all. Quito had healed enough to be released into a protected reserve, one where he could live freely among other hyenas, safe from hunters and starvation. It was the dream every rescuer had for their animals. But for Daniel, it felt like tearing away a piece of himself. On release day, he drove Quito to the reserve. The pup sat in the back, his eyes wide as if sensing the change. When Daniel opened the gate, Quito hesitated. He looked back, his gaze locking with Daniel's. For a heartbeat, Daniel saw everything they had endured together: fear, pain, trust, survival. His chest ached. He wanted to call him back, to keep him safe forever. But he knew love sometimes meant letting go. He knelt and whispered, "Go show them what strength looks like." Quito limped forward into the tall grass, his silhouette fading against the golden savanna. Daniel stayed until the pup disappeared from view, tears streaming freely down his face. That night, the center felt unbearably quiet without the sound of Quito's paws scratching at his door. But Daniel held onto the memory of those last eyes looking back, full of gratitude and defiance. And he knew, wherever Quito roamed now, he wasn't just surviving. He was living. Daniel turned to his journal, writing the final line of their story. "He lost a leg, but found a life. And in saving him, I found myself." If this story inspired you, remember, resilience is not about being unbroken. It's about refusing to surrender. If Quito's fight touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this story with someone who needs hope today. Because courage, once shown, can echo far beyond the savannah.